Whitehorse Airport, Yukon Territory, Canada. March 15th, 2019, 4:47 local time. The crisp Arctic air bit at everything it touched that afternoon as Arctic Express Flight 447 prepared for what should have been a routine cargo run to Yellowknife. The temperature gauge read minus 32 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze fuel lines, cold enough to make metal brittle, cold enough to kill a man in minutes without proper protection. But inside the cockpit of the twin-engine Beechcraft King Air 350, warmth radiated from more than just the heating system. It came from the easy camaraderie between two men who had flown together for over 8 years, through storms that would terrify seasoned pilots and conditions that tested the limits of both machine and human endurance. Captain James Jimmy McAllister, 52. A bear of a man with calloused hands and laugh lines etched deep around his eyes, Jimmy had been flying the northern routes for 23 years. Born in a one-room cabin outside Dawson City, he learned to fly before he could legally drive, soloing at 16 in his grandfather's Super Cub. His logbook showed 18,247 flight hours, nearly every one of them earned in the unforgiving skies above Canada's wilderness. Jimmy's wife, Sarah, often joked that he loved his airplane more than he loved her, but she knew better. She'd seen him cry when young pilots didn't make it home, seen him spend his own money to upgrade safety equipment, seen him turn down lucrative contracts because the weather was too dangerous for his crew. 3 children. Marcus, 19, studying aviation at the University of British Columbia. Rebecca, 16, who wanted to be a doctor, and little Tommy, 12, who built model airplanes in his bedroom and dreamed of following in his father's footsteps. First Officer David Chen, 29. David represented the new generation of Northern pilots, university-educated, technology-savvy, but hungry to learn from the old-timers who knew these routes like their own backyards. A second-generation Canadian whose parents had immigrated from Hong Kong, David had earned his commercial license just 4 years ago, but had already accumulated 3,400 hours, most of them beside Jimmy in this very cockpit. Where Jimmy flew by instinct and decades of experience, David flew by the book, religiously following checklists, monitoring instruments, calculating performance margins down to the last decimal. The combination worked perfectly. David's precision complemented Jimmy's intuition, creating a crew that Arctic Express considered their finest. David's girlfriend, Emily, was a nurse at Whitehorse General Hospital. They'd been planning their wedding for next summer, had already put a deposit down on a small house near the airport. David carried her picture in his flight bag, a candid shot of her laughing at something he'd said, her dark hair catching the sunlight. Flight 447 was a cargo-only flight. No passengers, 2,847 pounds of medical supplies, replacement parts for mining equipment, and mail for remote communities. 4,200 pounds of fuel, enough for the 3-hour flight to Yellowknife, plus generous reserves. Weather conditions were perfect. Clear skies, light winds, visibility unlimited. At 14:47, Jimmy's voice crackled over the radio with practiced professionalism. Whitehorse Tower, Arctic Express 447, ready for departure, runway 13 left. Arctic Express 447, Whitehorse Tower, cleared for takeoff runway 13 left, contact departure on 109.1. Cleared for takeoff 13 left, 109.1, Arctic Express 447. The twin Pratt Whitney PT-6A-60A engines spooled up to full power, their familiar whine filling the cockpit. David called out the speeds. V1, rotate, V2. Jimmy pulled back gently on the yoke, and Flight 447 lifted off into the crystalline Arctic sky, climbing steadily toward their cruising altitude of 24,000 feet. For the first hour and 37 minutes, everything proceeded normally. Jimmy and David ran through their routine checks, monitored weather reports, and discussed the unusual clarity of the day. Visibility seemed to stretch forever across the endless white wilderness below. "You know, Dave," Jimmy said, adjusting his headset, "after all these years, I still get a kick out of days like this. Look at that view!" David smiled, making notes in his logbook. "Emily keeps asking when I'm going to get tired of flying. I tell her, probably never. Smart girl, that Emily. When's the wedding again? June 15th. You and Sarah are still coming, right? Wouldn't miss it for the world, son." Time. The crisis begins. The first indication of trouble was subtle, so subtle that most pilots might have missed it. David noticed it first, a slight vibration in the rudder pedals, barely perceptible but definitely there. Jimmy, you feel that? David's voice carried just a hint of concern. Feel what? Jimmy was adjusting his seat, hadn't noticed the vibration yet. Rudder pedals. There's a slight bang. The explosion wasn't loud, more like a heavy door slamming, but it shook the entire aircraft. Immediately, warning lights flooded the instrument panel like a Christmas tree from hell. The master caution light bathed the cockpit in angry red, and multiple audio warnings began competing for their attention. Engine failure! Engine failure! Engine failure! Jimmy's training kicked in instantly. I have the aircraft, he announced, his hands already moving to the controls with the smooth precision of 23 years of experience. David's eyes swept the instrument panel. Right engine, oil pressure 0. EGT climbing through red line. The right Pratt Whitney had suffered a catastrophic failure. Chunks of metal had punched through the engine casing, severing oil lines and destroying internal components. Without oil pressure, the engine was literally tearing itself apart, generating tremendous heat and vibration. Feather the right prop, Jimmy commanded. David's hands flew to the appropriate switches. Feathering right prop, fuel cut off, generator off. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Jimmy, the prop won't feather. It's stuck in fine pitch. A propeller stuck in fine pitch on a failed engine is a pilot's worst nightmare. Instead of cutting cleanly through the air like a feathered prop, it acts like a massive air brake, creating enormous drag and making the aircraft nearly impossible to control. Whitehorse control, Arctic Express 447, declaring emergency. Jimmy's voice remained steady despite the chaos around him. We have a right engine failure with prop malfunction. Request immediate vectors back to Whitehorse. Arctic Express 447, Whitehorse control, roger your emergency. Turn right heading 180, descend and maintain 15,000 feet. Emergency equipment is rolling. The aircraft was fighting Jimmy every second now. The asymmetric thrust from the good left engine wanted to yaw the plane violently to the right, while the windmilling right prop created massive drag. Jimmy had to apply nearly full left rudder and significant left aileron just to maintain straight flight. Dave, give me power calculations. How much altitude are we losing? David's fingers worked frantically across his electronic flight computer. At this drag coefficient, Jimmy, we're losing about 1,200 feet per minute. At our current position, we won't make Whitehorse. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. They were 127 miles from Whitehorse Airport, and the laws of physics were working against them. The failed engine and windmilling prop were creating so much drag that even with the left engine at maximum power, they couldn't maintain altitude. What about Watson Lake? David suggested, naming the nearest alternate airport. Too far. We'd never make it. Jimmy's jaw was set in grim determination. What else is on the chart? David spread the sectional chart across his lap, searching desperately. There, mile 394 strip. It's a gravel runway, 3,800 feet, used by mining operations. How far? 43 miles, bearing 2 and 10. Jimmy looked at the strip marking on the chart. A gravel runway, probably not maintained, definitely not plowed, in the middle of nowhere. But it was their only chance. Whitehorse control, Arctic Express 4447. We cannot maintain altitude. We're diverting to mile 394 strip. Arctic Express 447, understand. Be advised that strip is uncontrolled and condition unknown. Emergency services are being notified. Roger, Whitehorse. Jimmy turned to his first officer. Dave, I need you to run the emergency landing checklist. And call Emily. David's face went pale. Jimmy? Just in case, son. Tell her you love her. While David worked through the emergency procedures, Jimmy fought the increasingly uncontrollable aircraft. The airspeed was bleeding off dangerously. Too slow, and they'd stall and spin into the ground. Too fast, and they'd overshoot the short gravel strip, if they even found it. There, David pointed through the windscreen. 2 o'clock, about 5 miles. The strip looked impossibly small from their altitude, a thin brown line scratched across endless white wilderness. No control tower, no lights, no emergency equipment. Just a rough gravel runway that might or might not be solid enough to support their aircraft. Gear down, Jimmy commanded. Gear coming down, 3 green lights. The landing gear added even more drag, accelerating their descent. Jimmy had to be perfect now. One mistake, and they'd either stall short of the runway or overshoot into the trees. Flaps 15! Flaps 15, selected! The aircraft shuddered as the flaps extended, but Jimmy held it steady. His left leg was cramping from the constant pressure on the rudder pedal, sweat stinging his eyes despite the cold. Dave, what's our sink rate? 1,800 feet per minute. Too fast. They were coming down like a brick, but Jimmy didn't dare reduce power on the good engine. He needed every bit of thrust to maintain airspeed. Quarter-mile final, David called out. The runway rushed up at them. Jimmy could see it wasn't plowed, just packed snow with patches of ice gleaming in the afternoon sun. At the last second, he pulled back on the yoke, flaring the aircraft for landing. They hit hard. The main gear struck the packed snow with tremendous force, bouncing the aircraft back into the air. Jimmy fought to keep the wings level as they came down again, this time to stay. But the nightmare wasn't over. The packed snow was more treacherous than it had appeared from the air. Underneath the white surface lay patches of glare ice, smooth as glass and twice as slippery. The aircraft began to slide sideways. Jimmy, we're sliding! Jimmy stood on the brakes, but the anti-skid system couldn't cope with the icy surface. The King Air 350 slewed to the right, toward a stand of pine trees at the runway's edge. Brace for impact, Jimmy shouted. Time seemed to slow down. Jimmy thought of Sarah, of his 3 children, of all the flights he'd never take. Beside him, David clutched Emily's photograph, whispering something Jimmy couldn't hear over the screaming of tortured metal. The right wing struck the first pine tree at 67 miles per hour. The impact spun the aircraft like a child's toy, ripping away the wing and rupturing the fuel tank. Aviation gasoline sprayed across the snow, creating a vapor cloud that ignited instantly when it reached the still hot remains of the failed engine. The explosion could be seen for miles across the wilderness. Emergency crews took 47 minutes to reach the crash site, following coordinates provided by Whitehorse Control. They found the aircraft broken in 3 pieces, scattered across 50 yards of forest floor. The cargo, those precious medical supplies and replacement parts, lay strewn among the pine trees like confetti at a tragic celebration. Captain James McAllister was found at his station, hands still gripping the controls, having fought for his crew and aircraft until the very end. First Officer David Chen was discovered clutching a photograph of a young woman with dark hair and a beautiful smile. The investigation later revealed that the engine failure had been caused by a microscopic fatigue crack in a turbine blade, a flaw so small it had escaped detection during routine maintenance inspections. The propeller feathering mechanism had failed due to hydraulic fluid that had crystallized in the extreme cold. 2 experienced pilots, 8,647 combined flight hours, decades of knowledge and skill, defeated by physics and circumstances beyond their control. But in those final moments, they had achieved something remarkable. Despite the impossible conditions, they had kept their aircraft under control long enough to attempt a landing. They had fought with everything they had, displaying the kind of courage and professionalism that defines aviation's finest. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more aviation stories that honor the heroes of the sky. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done in Jimmy's position? Have you ever experienced an emergency during flight? Share your thoughts below to help this video reach more people who need to understand the incredible risks that aviation professionals face every day.